clearly the administration confident that they are going to be able to deploy federal troops in some way, shape or form. And I think this is going to be a massive, massive fight between the administration and the Democratic leadership in both Oregon and Illinois.
Donald Trump was meeting earlier on. We carried some of the meeting live on the programme, meeting Mark Carney, the leader of Canada, in the Oval Office. Let's just have a little listen to just a little snatch of that.
Once this deal happens, if it does happen, look, they're in negotiations right now. We are going to do everything possible. We have a lot of power, and we're going to do everything possible to make sure everybody adheres to the deal.
Well, look, Donald Trump hoping that there can be progress on that deal in Egypt. And are they optimistic over there? As far as I say over there, Lara, I suppose I mean in the White House and maybe the more generally around the Washington Commentariat, because I keep talking to people who are surprisingly optimistic.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that for now there remains a great deal of optimism. We've heard from President Trump multiple times since Friday when Hamas gave its agreement, albeit with conditions, to that 20-point peace plan as proposed by Trump. Trump clearly sounding confident about the prospects of peace, has spoken multiple times about how he hopes it could lead to a durable and lasting peace in the region following these negotiations, and saying today in the Oval Office that he will do everything possible to enforce a ceasefire in Gaza as those talks continue in Egypt. Obviously, there are still a number of hurdles yet to clear, and we've spoken about this on the show before. Not only these initial rounds, which we understand are focused on a release of the hostages and the exchange of political prisoners as set out in that plan, and the imminent arrival, they hope, of aid in Gaza, but also what comes after that. And Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and others acknowledging that the longer term plans for the administration, particularly of the Strip, the requirement that Hamas disarm and have no role long term in the governing of Gaza, those things are all going to be much more complicated to agree on and to get agreement from the various parties on too.
So much of this, Lara, is about neither side, not Israel, not Netanyahu, not Hamas. Neither side want to be the one to fall foul of Donald Trump. I mean, in that sense, his muscle is so important a part of the equation.
That's very true. And certainly there's been a lot of commentary about the leverage that Trump has had with Netanyahu in particular in recent weeks, particularly after the strike, the unsuccessful strike on Qatar from the Israelis to try and take out some of those Hamas leaders. That proving, it appears from reporting, to have been a significant impetus in getting Netanyahu to agree on this plan and getting all of those negotiators around the table to try and work out the specifics. So certainly in this case, as you say, nobody wanting to seem like they are the one that turns their back on the prospect of peace, which does seem to be closer than it has been for a very long time. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why you hear those at the administration, Trump chief among them, being so optimistic at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, Adam and Tim, I mean, we can't see into the future, okay, but what is your feeling, Adam?
My feeling remains quite good. I mean, I think the Americans are reporting that Witkoff and Jared Kushner are going to head to Egypt.
Which is a very good sign.
Quite soon. What they're saying is that the technical discussions as to quite which prisoners will be released and all that are underway at a lower level, but the arrival of those two to these proximity talks between the two sides would suggest that they were moving towards a clinching. And of course, the other point we have to bear in mind is that theoretically we've got a deadline on this, that Trump is saying Friday is the deadline. If it's not agreed by then all hell will break loose towards the Hamas and the Palestinians. Now, we've seen his deadlines come and go before in a number of contexts, but he does seem to be concentrating things, and one of the reasons appears to be because of his, vanity in thinking that if he can clinch this, he can get nominated for this year's Nobel Prize, and the deadline for that is also Friday. Well, he may be trivial and vain and all the rest of it, but if that is leading him to really focus on this and to put pressure on the participants, that could actually have a beneficial outcome. Whether or not, in their wisdom, the Scandinavians decide to award the Peace Prize is quite a different matter.
Interesting to see what that decision is. By the way, Tim Montgomery.
I'm just sort of thinking about the hostages. Just we began with Adam and I both began with thoughts of the day on what happened 2 years ago, and I'm just sort of flashing before my eyes in a sort of really superficial way, everything that's happened to me in the last 2 years, all the meetings, all the experiences that I've had, and to think that some people have been hostages for all of those 2 years in the most extraordinary of often barbaric conditions. And I just pray, John, I just pray, whatever the politics, whatever, that people will be reunited with their loved ones. Of course, I think most of the remaining hostages are probably dead. I think that's pretty sure. Most of the remaining hostages were military hostages, probably treated even less well by Hamas than the other hostages that have already been released. Goodness knows what condition they are in. Goodness knows what mental and physical torture they have experienced. Just pray God that we do have good news for them and their families in the next few days, because it's beyond our comprehension what they've been through.
We can all absolutely endorse that thought. So look, we've heard sort of bits of this before, but last night there he was, President Trump, against the background of deploying troops to various American cities, suggesting that he could use the Insurrection Act to deploy soldiers to Chicago and Portland. Just have a listen.
Most of these cities are Democrat-run, and we don't care, Democrat, Republican, we're going to make them safe. So we have to save Chicago. It's very important. And you can't have a governor getting up and saying it's good when 11 people were shot over a weekend. What?
The Insurrection Act, under what conditions or terms would you?
Well, I'd do it if it was necessary. So far, it hasn't been necessary, but we have an Insurrection Act for a reason. If I had to enact it, I'd do that. If people were being killed and courts were holding us up, or governors or mayors were holding us up, sure, I'd do that.
So he would do that. He'd consider doing that. He'd do it. Invoke the Insurrection Act. I mean, Lara Spirit, the president was also calling Portland a burning hellhole. He called Chicago a war zone. And it can be stated as objective truth, can't it, that Portland is not a burning hellhole and Chicago is not a war zone.
I think that that is certainly something which many of the Democratic leaders who are completely resolutely opposed to the deployment of any federal troops on their soil will be making very loudly over the coming days, and are seeking to do so in the courts, where they are having, I think it could be said, moderate success at the moment. In Portland, we have seen a judge block the National Guard's arrival, but in Chicago, we've seen a judge give the administration until tomorrow evening to explain why they think that this is necessary. Now, some are speculating that this will mean that the National Guard are on their way at the moment, and indeed around half of the 200 of those troops who are expected to be deployed from the Texas National Guard, where they are being sent from, did land in Chicago last night, with the remainder set to arrive by the end of this evening. So clearly the administration confident that they are going to be able to deploy federal troops in some way, shape or form. And I think this is going to be a massive, massive fight between the administration and the Democratic leadership in both Oregon and Illinois.
Yeah, and with the courts, as it were, in the middle, being judged step by step by step. It's a conservative, a known conservative, and a Trump-appointed judge who's blocked the president's will in the city of Portland in Oregon. Adam, I mean, we touched on it, but it's such an important, interesting story.
Okay, the first thing to say is this is not necessary. I mean, there is a certain level of crime in the United States, but it's been going down, and it's not necessary to deploy the National Guard or indeed to deploy ICE in the way that it's being deployed. Second thing is, when Trump says, oh, it doesn't care, I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican states, that's a bull-faced lie. He's targeting states which are Democratic bases. He's already been to California, to Los Angeles. He's going into Illinois. He's going into Oregon. And the reason why he's doing this is because there is a concerted attempt by this administration to overturn the checks and balances of the exercise of power inside the United States, to basically make everything go back to the will of Donald Trump and his allies. And it's profoundly democratic and undemocratic, and it's very, very serious. The rest of the world we've had the tariffs, which are damaging economically, on foreign policy. Trump's made a mess of it, but it hasn't been too destructive. But what he's doing inside the United States at the moment is seriously divisive and undemocratic, and makes one, worry for the future of the United States. And we are seeing overt attempts for him to make the National Guard. We saw Hegseth last week lecturing the generals to make all those forces loyal to him personally as the president. And that is something which is generally scary. And people are getting crushed in this as well.
Lara, so many roads lead to the Supreme Court of the United States. It hasn't always gone the way of the administration of the Supreme Court, but it has in key instances. They've got a strong conservative majority. What's the thinking where this issue is concerned on the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, the thinking is that it might be one of the key tests before the Supreme Court that they will face and for the Trump administration. I mean, it is worth saying, as you indicate there, John, that on the questions that matter, the Supreme Court has been largely supportive of the president. And I think there'd be some confidence within the White House at seeing this issue escalated. But I mean, just to that point that Adam raised, which is an important one, listening to President Trump and Mark Carney just now in the Oval Office, Trump comparing at one point the Democratic Party to Somalia and saying these Democrats are like insurrectionists, they're so bad for our country. I think making it very clear that this is part of a political fight that they are also having, and that language of the enemy of within that we saw last week was very instructive.
Right. I mean, Tim Montgomery, and you've been speaking up for the president in the past. And what do you think on this occasion, on this subject?
Well, first of all, I think I respect the procedure of American law. Laura's right that the Supreme Court has largely backed the president, but not wholly. The Supreme Court has made judgments that the president hasn't wanted, and I think we need to respect that process. Where I think I differ from Adam, finally we've got an area of difference, Adam. It's been too long in this hour before us to reach this point. A city like Chicago, I'm not so familiar with Portland and Oregon, but a city like Chicago, the rate of violence, of gun violence in that city is off the charts. Adam might be right that the number of deaths by homicide is falling. I don't know, but it's sort of at a level which would shame Baghdad and other places. I certainly wouldn't go to a whole range of parts of Chicago if I visited. The victims of that gun violence are largely black Americans. A lot of it to do with drugs, but if we were talking earlier about Handsworth, a lot of these places in America really are almost completely black areas. They are riddled by crime, and if something can be done, the authorities in Chicago, the authorities in Illinois haven't done anything about this gun violence and anything like the scale that's necessary. If it's constitutional, if the Supreme Court is happy with interventions to reduce that gun violence, I'm afraid I'm inclined to back President Trump on this particular issue. So let's see where it ends up with the courts.
I'm just going to say thanks again to Lara Trump, and do come back and join us again very soon, because you can bet we're going to really be keen to get you back with us, Lara there in Washington. Do you want to pick up that point that levels of crime have been falling in Chicago, haven't they? And they do have a police force.
Yeah, the levels of crime have been falling. They do have a police force, and it is true that there is quite a lot of black on black violence, but it's also true that statistically, I know Tim doesn't like talking about race, but statistically there's just as much homicides amongst the non-black community, if I can put it that way. But
Not in Chicago. I think there's a particular problem in Chicago. The rate per population, head of population, Adam, in Chicago is off the scale. Lots of whites kill each other in America, often by accident, etc. But the drug-fueled violence in Chicago has been a persistent problem in America for some time.
Well, also the point I would make is that the areas which have been targeted so far, LA, DC, Chicago, are all areas which have a high African-American population. And I do think that there is as well as an anti-democratic angle to what Trump is doing, I suspect there's also a racist one. What I'd also say is that, we've had the deputy chief of staff saying that it's absolutely unacceptable to have insurrection on the streets. Well, as is being pointed out, the biggest insurrection on the streets took place outside the Capitol on January the 6th and 2021. And Trump pardoned those people responsible.
Yeah, I mean, many of those were pardoned, and Tim, the director of the FBI, was just saying the other day that he felt it was absolutely right to say that FBI agents were all over the January the 6th insurrection, acting as agent provocateur. I mean, do you buy into that?
I don't. And at the time that Trump made the pardons of people involved in January 6th, I criticised it. I can understand how some people were pardoned, but he actually pardoned people found guilty of violent offences, not least against the Capitol Hill police. That's indefensible in my view.